Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Raise the Vibe with Liz. I'm your host, Liz Peterson, and today I'll be interviewing Judith Corvin-Blackburn. We're going to be talking all about 5D and what that is. So Judith Corvin-Blackburn is a writer, teacher, shamanic minister, and workshop presenter who has been in a private psychotherapy practice for over 35 years. She is the author of 3 books: Activating Your 5D Frequency, a guidebook for the journey into higher dimensions; Empowering the Spirit, a process to activate your soul's potential; and Journey to Wholeness, a guide to inner healing. She offers spiritual development workshops around the country and global online classes. Her work, while grounded in psychotherapeutic theory, is generated from her strong connection to higher guidance and from the wisdom she has gained through her life experience, spiritual development, and personal healing process. Underlying all she does is a commitment to help transform our planet into the loving, peaceful, and creative place it is meant to be. Judith, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Liz. I must have sent a typo. It's 45 years, not 35. I'm like,
congratulations, 45 years. That's fantastic. Yes, thank you for helping the planet. We appreciate you.
Yeah, that's what we're all here to do.
Right? Grow and transform and be there for each other, right? Unity consciousness. Yes. And that's what we're going to be diving in today, is that 5D unity consciousness. But first, can you give a little bit about your journey to this discovery, to this 5D work?
Sure. And it's always an interesting place to figure out where to start, but we'll see what comes out. Okay. I had a spiritual awakening in my late 20s. From about 12 to then, I would have told you I was an atheist, and I'm proud of it. This was in the early 70s. And then I had an awakening. It was really kicked off probably by lots of things, as you know, where a lot of things are going on for us at one time. But what I was most conscious of is each morning I would do a little yoga, and then I would read the autobiography of a yogi by Yogananda, and I'd read like 3 or 4 pages a day. And my whole psyche started opening, everything started shifting. And I had these powerful experiences, one in particular that where all of a sudden I knew, of course, the divine is here. And it totally shifted me. So from then on, I was always interested in astrology and consciousness things before then. And obviously yoga, I was doing yoga, but my whole perception of reality really had shifted to a much broader place. Now I call it expanding our broadband. Right? We're expanding our broadband width. All of a sudden we go, oh, wait a minute, what we thought was all there is, all of a sudden keeps expanding and expanding. And simultaneously, I was getting my master's in social work. And those were the days when people really were teaching about consciousness. And the program I was in was very experiential, which was wonderful. I was exposed to some fabulous things. And so once I graduated, a couple of years after I graduated, I went into private practice. And at that point, created a holistic private practice with some friends of mine. We had a sliding scale, and I found the brochure a couple of years ago and went, whoa, we're kind of talking about what people are talking about now. So I was kind of tuned in. And as that developed, so really from the start, when I started doing my psychotherapy, I did what's called transpersonal, where I incorporated the soul and the soul's mission into my healing practice. So that's been a long time. As things went along, and and I don't remember, it could have happened right back then, or it could have happened a little later. I realized that we were on an evolution. We were about to have an evolutionary leap as a species. I didn't have the multidimensional words or the multidimensional theory per se at the time. But I did understand that there was a leap of consciousness going on, and that it was really important because we knew back then we were aware of global warming. We were aware of a lot of the issues that, while not resolved fully, we were certainly speaking into justice and equality, honoring nature, honoring the earth, all of that stuff. But when I really started getting into the kind of multidimensionality that I've written about in terms of the dimensions, it was only about 12, 13 years ago. And I had been reading some of Barbara Hand Clow for many years, but a friend of mine told me about her book called Alchemy of Nine Dimensions. And in that book, she presents to what to me was this elegant theory of multidimensionality, this 9-dimensional axis that as humans on planet Earth, we have access to. And Barbara's quite brilliant. And what she did is, with each dimension, she connected it with physics. Wow. So, and while I'm no expert on physics, I've been into, of course, the the new physics, which actually has been around since the early 1900s, quantum physics, and would teach a little bit from that. But for anybody that has a scientific focus, what she does is brilliant. So when I came across that 9D theory, it was like, yes, this is it. And I started teaching it pretty quickly. And I would do, just workshops here and there about it. And I was really excited. And then, 4 or 5 years into it, I'm like, oh gosh, do we really need another theory? Really? This is just about being in your heart, opening up, keeping it simple. So I backed off for a while. And then I stepped back into it. It just came kind of flowing through me. I was actually at a mystery school that my friend Linda Starwolf was running, who's my next door neighbor, actually. And I didn't even know why I was in there, but it was close. And I loved the word mystery school. So I jumped in. Within 20 minutes, I realized that what was supposed to happen for me is I was supposed to teach a multidimensional mystery school. So I went through that. And then within, I don't know, maybe 4 months later, again, with no conscious intention of writing another book, I was on a 2-week retreat at the ocean, and my newest book, Activating Your 5D Frequency, just started to download. So that's how I got from my, late teen, early 20s, God is, God doesn't exist, to where I am now, which is the sacred is everything, the divine is in everything. I'll stop there. How's that?
That's a fantastic journey. And I think a lot of people on the spiritual path have a similar story. Yes. Starting to doubt in the beginning because they've been raised with traditional religions and stuff like that. And, kind of gotten a little off put, to put it mildly, in some cases, right? And then it's like a coming back to that spiritual sense, within yourself, and that searching part, right? So describe a little bit about what your book is, what is multidimensionality, and your definition of 5D.
Okay, let me start with my definition of 5D.
Sure.
Because it's really simple. I guess that's where I'll start. Maybe I need to start with multidimensionality first. In the theory I use, which again came through Barbara Hand Clow, but interestingly to me anyway, was taught by Plato in Greece, and I think came from Atlantis, this particular way. I think it came from Atlantis to Egypt to Greece, and now it's making a comeback. And it's not the only way, it's not the only lens. A lot of people are into the sacred geometry way of looking at the dimensions, which it's all authentic. But in this lens that I use, we are, as we all know, in a 3D world. And in 3D, you have polarity. So, I mean, it's even simple physics. For every reaction, there's an equal and opposite reaction. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So in 3D, we kind of got stuck in this polarity piece. Now, I believe we were meant to be fifth dimensional beings. So I'm going to get non-linear for a minute and just go into this.
Sure.
I believe we were probably collectively most humans on the planet, I believe probably until about, I don't know, maybe 15,000 years ago, were often operating in 5D, and that there has been a dimensional descent. I think there are indigenous tribes that were able to keep that frequency, that keep that level of consciousness, but for the most of, at least the humanity that's been writing history, we've devolved. I saw this really clearly in Egypt, where the very ancient Egyptians, way before the pharaohs, and again, our history doesn't typically go back there, were in a much higher awareness and much more, a much more harmonious and evolved societies, which I call 5D societies, than what has occurred after the fact. And now we're at a point where we get to evolve again. We get to go back up, so to speak, or speed up our frequency. So anyway, that was sort of 3D and our fall into 3D. And actually, when I was teaching one of the early workshops I did on multidimensionality, right in the middle of the workshop, it dawned on me that the biblical fall is actually a legend about the dimensional descent, except Eve got blamed, which was the patriarchy. We're going to throw that one out. But even, you know, it's there. It's in our so-called history. So this evolutionary shift we're going through is a movement into being more and more in the fifth dimension. And the qualities of the fifth dimension are unconditional love for self, which people forget, and others. Okay, so self-love is very important there. Unity consciousness, which you had mentioned, understanding everything is interconnected. We are all interconnected. If people are going to play the game of winners and losers, we all lose. We all really need to do this together. And unbridled creativity, which is probably my favorite, because what that says to me is, despite the outward state of things, there are people on the planet right now that really have the creativity to heal what we have almost destroyed, for lack of a better way to say that. And that's it. Okay, if we get down to the real nitty gritty, that's the basic piece. Now, what that means is we move out of judgment. Essentially, we move out of ego. We use our egos as tools, but we come from spirit. So, you know, again, this is really simple stuff, Liz, and I believe almost everybody, the vast majority of people, have experienced that fifth dimensional frequency, whether they're conscious of it or not. When you feel expansive and loving and joyful, that's 5D. When you've released that moment of angst, that's 5D. So in terms of the book, you know, I start out giving the multidimensional theory, and then I go through both what we're moving toward, but also what stands in our way. Because I've been a psychotherapist for so long, yeah, I really understand the human psyche. So I understand it's not just, oh, wow, this is great. I'll just ignore everything else that's going on inside of me. And I'll get into all this beautiful stuff. Lovely, but we've got to take our whole selves with it.
Yes.
Which means we've got to look at clearing the emotional field, becoming embodied, that stuff. So I speak a lot of how to move through fears, how to move through resistances, I don't speak specifically about emotional healing because my other books deal with that, but just enough to give people clarity of what the process they have to go through in order to authentically get there. Because the fourth dimension is where all the emotional shit gets stuck. Okay. And it's that ideally it can clear. When you clear that, then you have this beautiful light that takes you into the fifth dimension. But if we're carrying our emotional wounds, I mean, there's probably no one on the planet that hasn't experienced some trauma.
Right.
Being in 3D is a very traumatic experience. And things that, how can I say this? Even things like child abuse, why would any species hurt their children? Right? It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And yet it's so rampant in our culture, in our world, really. So just as an example of, wait, this doesn't make any sense, folks. We don't have to get stuck here. And this is what I believe we're moving away from. We're really healing those wounds and stepping into creating a 5D world where that's beautiful. That's where people are kind to each other. People are loving to each other, where where differences are seen as positive rather than somehow threatening. Where all children are born in a field of love and raised in a field of love. Just to give you a little preview.
I love that. And it really is true that we do reach the light through our wounds. Right. And how beautiful would it be if we reached a day where the light already existed? We didn't have to be wounded, and we didn't have to take that journey, through self-discovery and self-inquiry, and do our shadow work to get to, that place, right? That it was already programmed into us from the ages of 0 to 7, right? When we're going through our programming, that's what we were receiving instead of the earlier, right?
Absolutely. And when you have a whole society that promotes that, when my book first came out in May of 2020. So I had these book talks set up, and of course I couldn't go anywhere, which quite frankly worked well for me because I like to be at home. But I was able to do some online things. It really got me into doing a lot of online. And one of the bookstores out in Portland, I was supposed to do a book signing for. I did a online piece instead. And there was a young woman, and she asked me this question, and I just loved it because I think people think this on some level. She goes, well, wouldn't it be boring? No trauma, what? But no, it wouldn't be, because there would be so much creativity. And all that creativity would be put into art and drama and inventiveness. And, let's see how we can create magic in the earth to grow nutritious food ever faster, that kind of, there's all sorts of things we haven't even begun to think about or feel about. So it wouldn't be boring, but I certainly understood her question. And at her age, I probably would have said the same thing.
Yeah, it's good. It kind of makes me stop and think, like, I have this idea that this is a learning planet, that,
Yes.
we start off in ego and we have children or we nurture in other ways and we realize it's not just us. And, there's this growth process, this maturation of the personality, right? So if we don't have that, we have this utopian society, right? It's almost hard for our brains to grasp onto, oh, we're not going to be growing and evolving anymore on this planet. Like, what is it going to look like?
And there definitely will be growth and evolution.
Mhm.
This is like from A to C, maybe. We don't know.
Right.
But,
All a mystery.
but it doesn't have to be growth from suffering. And that's a really 3D concept,
Mm-hmm.
is that you have to suffer to grow. And it's, that's been so programmed in that to shift that, I want to say take some work, but fun work. How's that?
Right.
Right.
I think it will, because, we are, that's a great word. We are programmed to be in suffering, to come from suffering, to get hung up on our suffering. Right. And the trick is, and everybody's trying to do it. Meditation, mindfulness, and all of these other programs, that we get involved in to try to step away from our suffering. Okay, I'm having this suffering, but I'm really causing this suffering on myself because I'm trapped in my emotions. It has nothing to do with anybody else. Right. And then stepping out of that and trying to live in a space with more joy. Right.
Yes, 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 yes. Right. And, yes, to understand we cause that in the sense that, it's tricky because we don't want to go, oh, I'm guilty or I'm shamed or whatever. But to understand that it does give us the power to shift it. And that's the primary lesson. And that, part of it is just to notice when we go into suffering mode and think, whoa, wait, maybe it doesn't have to be this way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So how do we do that? So we're in a 5D world. We realize we're all one, right? So I think that plays into it as well, right? Because if we're looking at other, we're in our suffering, but if we start looking at the oneness, of the planet and what we do to others, we're actually doing to ourselves.
Yes.
And even the planet. Like what we do to the planet also affects us because we are one with the planet. Anybody who sat in meditation and who has felt that oneness with everything knows that. So how do we start to shift that in our lives?
Okay, let me kind of breathe into that. That's a wonderful question and it's a big one. So let me see where to start. Well, I really think the first thing that comes is to be gentle with ourselves. To notice when we're stuck, to notice when we're not kind to ourselves, we're hard on ourselves, again, that's gotten very programmed in. And judging ourselves, and to first give ourselves credit for noticing and then begin to work on shifting that. Now, the other piece is when we notice when we project it onto others. Mm-hmm. So I really think, and this is really the mindfulness piece, the more we can just go into loving neutrality, which is very 5D, right, with ourselves. Right, as well as with all those in our lives and the world. And we're being so tested right now to step out of polarity and to be awake and simultaneously lovingly neutral with the fact that people have very different opinions, very different views of the world. And how to hold that, that's not easy. And I guess the other most important thing is we are not perfect. Mm-hmm. We're not going to do it perfectly. We're not going to be perfect. We are going to bumble through because we're human. So
right? And we're stuck in our own perceptions,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
sometimes, being stuck in our own perceptions don't allow for seeing others, right?
Right. Well, yes, we're stuck in our perceptions, we're stuck in our story. So it's really hard to see where other people are coming from. And I'll speak for myself.
Mhm.
I'm stuck in my opinions. I'm stuck when I think I'm right. And, versus loving. And the loving part we can feel in our hearts.
Mhm.
And that's the most essential piece, is to be loving toward ourselves and loving toward that, and if we're loving toward ourselves, I think we just naturally are loving toward others. So.
Yeah. And those opinions, it's funny, even as you're going through life and you have these different things happen to you and others have opinions about your experience, not even knowing anything about what's happened in your experience, which I think is quite amusing sometimes.
and that's the other piece, right, is humor. When
Mhm.
you can see it all from a place of humor, that is a higher frequency place of perception.
Mhm. And it's really kind of a stepping back and observing and kind of go, yeah.
You're right.
And kind of moving on. No explanation needed or anything, just moving on. So let's talk about that mindset. And I want to discuss our mindset as far as frequency, because 5D is really holding that frequency. And, it's still physical, right? And
It is
which
physical.
is
Yes.
3D, that physical 3D duistic reality, but differentiating between the two as far as mindset and frequency, between the 3D and the 5D.
Well, the first thing I thought of when you started talking was a friend of mine years ago had a bumper sticker that said, "Don't believe everything you think." So, we start with the idea that our intellects, which are very useful, are not quite literally the heart of the matter. And they're finding this new research, which I'm just a little bit know about, like the heart brain.
Yes.
So yes, we sort of need our intellect, especially we're going through, this is a transitional time. The other piece that I talk about a lot, because I know it's true, is we're not going to be able to hold a 5D frequency all the time. It's impossible. The more we can do it, lovely, we're going to feel great. People are going to like to be around us. We're going to spread good stuff, good. But we're also going to crash into 3D. It's just the way we're made. It's the journey. It's part of the process. And so, I guess I just feel it's really important to put that out there, because as humans, especially in the Western world, we have this expectation, oh, I know this, so I better be able to do it. And it just isn't going that way. The other piece, so I may be getting a little off track, but I guess I'm feeling I'm going here anyway. We talk about creating reality, because we sort of know that we're creating reality. That in 3D, a lot of times we create our reality from the unconscious. So on one hand, we want prosperity, but we're carrying these inner beliefs. I don't deserve it, or anything else, like any other crap like that goes on. If we don't bring it into consciousness, it has more power. So when we find ourselves being in a reality in 3D that is not serving us, is not making us feel good, and therefore not serving anybody else, it's because we have these unconscious beliefs that are running the show without our awareness. And well, again, it's a journey trying to bring that into consciousness and shift that. as we go more and more though into this, we're actually going into a 5th and 6th dimensional frequency. The 6th dimension is all about it's the quantum field. It's what Plato called the world of forms. It's like all potentiality exists there. And from our 5D frequency, we can just go, okay, I'm going to choose this, blank, and this, right? No, I'm not there yet. I'd like to be. I can see it, though. I can feel it. I can see how it can work. I do believe that's where we're evolving. And that's part of the creativity, that where it's not going to be boring. So, and the other piece I think is important to say, although I really think people understand this, but when we talk about we're all one, it doesn't mean we're all the same. We're like the image that works for me is like we are all like individual cells that are unique and have different jobs in this huge organism of consciousness that, as you say, it's not just humans and four-leggeds, it's the earth, it's the universe, it's the multiverse. We don't know how big it is because we're not there yet. So when you perceive from 5th dimension, you perceive that from, again, I really believe you perceive it from the heart. It feels different in our cells. If people can pay attention and just notice how the body feels, there's a sense of expansiveness. So then you might think about something, but it's more how it feels that holds sway, that holds truth, than the specific perception.
I like that. And you also talk about codimensionality in your book, and you're kind of going there a little bit now. Can you elaborate more on that?
Yeah, we're living in, as we're going through this, we are without question living in, well, let me give away that without question. There's my opinionated stuff. Let's go to more than likely. We are holding these different frequencies at the same time. And you have read that part of my book. It actually, the image as I was writing it came from Barbara Hand Clow's book of a piano turned vertically. And so if you think about, you play high C and you play middle C, and they both have, they have a harmonious sound, but they are vibrating at different speeds. So I think that, that for me, again, that was the image that really held that idea that we could be in 2 different dimensions simultaneously and still feel a sense of coherence, because high C and middle C sound in harmony. And so I think there's something that's going on where we're going, we're flipping from one to the other somewhat, but we can also hold both. And when we hold both, which is probably really important right now in the stage we're in, we have a sense of how we're being called to not just to serve the higher, but simultaneously how to do that in 3D, how to relate to people stuck in 3D to some degree. One theory, and honestly, I don't have a big opinion about this, is that maybe we're going to split off and we're really going to be living in 2 different worlds on the planet, where some people are going to be in a 3D frequency and timeline, and some are going to be in 5D frequency. There's always choice. It's not like, oh, you can't get to 5D, but either through fear or whatever, there are people that resist that. Even though they would.
And I think, going over what you said, where I really feel like we're kind of living that now. It's kind of like that viewpoint, the young soul and the old soul, right? Doing
Yeah.
things the old way, being stuck, me and them, thoughts and that sort of thing. I'm not connected to the environment. I can do whatever I want to it. It'll last forever, whatever,
Right.
right? Or they're over there, I'm here, that sort of thing. And I think I like what you were saying about that codimensionality, and kind of an aha around that, where we're holding this 3D reality, and we're also holding the 5D, because we know that the 5D, those other ways of being, are what's going to shift us out of the 3D. So we have to actually hold and coddle the 3D and teach it, right? In order
Oh,
to
yeah.
mature it into, the environment that we want to live in.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. Hold it and coddle it. That's great. Yes, right.
Yeah.
And just, for those listening or watching, it's like just the fact that you can see it here means you're already operating here in a much broader place, because this is a good balance, again, even to be holding our 3D selves and coddling them, being
Right.
sweet to ourselves too.
Which is what we're doing during shadow work, right? When we're,
Yes.
doing self-reflection and inquiry,
Yes.
and doing that shadow work, and like sort of maturing out of those old belief systems, patterns, and programs, that's what we're doing. We're kind of holding ourselves and, finding new ways of doing things that are more evolved than what we did in the past, right?
Absolutely. Yes. And it is, and it's really interesting because we have to have gone through that shadow work and really keep doing the shadow work in order, well, again, in the multidimensional theory I use, really in order to not get stuck in the fourth dimensional muck and to clear it, or not to muck up our own emotional field.
Mhm.
So that ongoing, and the piece, of course, is the way to get through shadow is to be able to love it without acting it out, but just to realize it's part of being human. It's part of the experience we had. One flash I had as a possibility is that one of the reasons for the de-evolution was to understand what it's like to be in a denser experience, to open us to even more compassion. Because if you don't know what that's like, you can't really, I don't know how else to say it, you haven't been tested.
Right.
You haven't, and you haven't, and what you said about maturing, you haven't. I think it helps us come into another level of maturation.
Mhm.
So
Yeah. And the universe doesn't give us it's actually giving us a lot of examples these last couple of years of holding that dense energy, right? Where it's just so in our face right now, where before it was just functioning under the surface and you could buy into it or not. Right now it's in our face and we're all holding that dense energy. So exhausting.
yeah, I know.
Right.
It's not fun.
No.
I agree. And again, we can be guided of how to go through it without the exhaustion continuing, so to speak, but we are smack dab in the middle of this, well, really, of collective shadow work.
Yeah, I think it's really maturing everybody to stop acting like 2, 4, and 15-year-olds, right?
Yeah.
Stop throwing tantrums and enforcing your will and controlling people, Step out of that and step into other, unity consciousness. It's not all about you and what you want, right? And I'm going to go there. It's not about, sitting in a boardroom with a bunch of other politicians deciding what's going to be your platform,
Right. Yeah, where again, the part of what will dissolve is this attachment to what feels like power, but isn't really power. It's a very patriarchal version, because what's happened from my perception in the patriarchy, not only have women, of course, been hugely wounded, but men have been hugely wounded because they've been disconnected from their feminine. It's the feminine that holds the wisdom, that holds the intuition, that really connects with the divine. And if you're disconnected from that, you're always going to feel insecure and think you have to always one up somebody to be okay, which is a horrible place to be. It's not, it is not a fun place, but that's part of the programming. That somehow that makes you okay, makes you a man.
Yeah, right. I would like to see a society where we're kind of stepping out of those ways of being, and instead of, worrying about, okay, what's our platform going to be, which area, could we get the most votes?
Yeah.
Deciding our reproductive health is going to be an issue, to try to pull people over to vote more Republican, or, the other side more Democratic, right? And come into a more balanced society where we're, thinking of people as a whole, as sovereign, autonomous beings.
Right. And what's going to serve the highest?
Yeah. What's going to serve the
highest? How do you
highest?
serve? How do you, starting with how do you genuinely serve, as opposed to self-serving?
So let's talk about serving and differentiating between 3D and 5D. I think that would be an interesting conversation.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. Again, I have to kind of ponder. I don't have to ponder 5D. That's easy.
Right.
Because with 5D, because you're interconnected, if you serve from love, you're always serving the highest good. In 3D, where you get into that duality, if you serve from an us, them, and again, we see that so hugely right now in the United States, especially. If you're serving from an us, them, that's not serving. I don't know how else to say that one.
Self-serving.
It's self-serving, right? But again, I think that people that get stuck in the self-serving really don't understand that they're hurting themselves as well. And that they're not living a loving, joyful life, because you always have to look over your shoulder for starters. And it's just not authentic well-being. And really, everybody is striving to feel good and to feel loved. So
you just need to bring love into more of more avenues in our lives, right? The powers that be, so to speak. Right. So what traits and commonalities come along with living in 5D?
Well, really being in non-judgment. Now, again, we're in a process here. So, and a non-judgment doesn't mean you don't discern. I really feel like that's important to say, but you're not holding judging energy. And when I teach around that, I have people feel into, think of something you feel very judgmental about, whether it's yourself or somebody else or something else, and notice how it feels in your body. And what people notice, of course, is we contract. Each of us may hold it somewhat differently, but there's a sense of contraction. There may be a sense of, if it's projected out, and I judge that person as not being as smart as I am, or as good as, or was whatever, I may momentarily pat my ego. So there might be a momentary, oh, this feels kind of good, but it really doesn't feel good if you go into it. When you move into a place of non-judgment, it's not that you don't discern, as an example, what will serve best, but you don't go into that judgy energy. And so you can be open and you can understand everybody has their path. And some people are experiential learners and have to experience some things that other people can just hear about and don't have to. That we all have our different paths, and we all have our different syllabus, for instance, where, our schools are all a little different. We're all an independent study here.
Mhm.
So, I think that's certainly part of the criteria of the qualities.
I want to pause right there because I
Okay.
think this is important. Share with our listeners maybe some tips and tools on how to hold that, right? To hold where somebody, this is their learning experience, right?
Yeah.
We may not like it, that they're having this process, because it's affecting a larger group of people, right?
Right.
How do we hold that?
Well,
And
can I come back? First of all, let me say that depending how close you are to that journey,
Mhm.
depends on how difficult it's going to be. So if it's someone you love that you're either afraid for or something like that, that's going to be even more challenging. In terms of more collective kinds of things, again, I just feel it's really learning more and more how to tune into our own energy. When I'm in a non-judging space, when I'm in an open fifth dimensional space, I can feel the expansiveness. It's relaxed. I think that's another piece. It's not stressed, which people in our society barely know what not stress means. but as you say, this is why people have been doing meditation and yoga and mindfulness, and just really stopping when you feel that contracted energy, being really loving to yourself, going into the heart, and just seeing if you can find the compassion for whatever this person's going through that you don't think is positive. Maybe you're discerning that this is not something that's very helpful. That may be accurate. That maybe we don't have to go through that stage if we could all just jump the hurdle. That may be accurate too.
Right.
But this is where we are right now, and just holding that experience and love. And again, it's not an intellectual experience. It is very much a body experience.
Mhm.
And so many of us were disconnected from our bodies and trusting that. So, that in and of itself is part of our journeys in getting into this more evolved place, which is get back in our bodies and understand the gifts we get when we tune into our feelings. And then it's trusting, how to trust the feelings, that's
Right.
the other piece of it. There's lots of um, uh, lots of challenges. I remember going to a meeting in 2016 of people who were a little upset about where things were going. And I turned to a woman I didn't know who was sitting in front of me, and I went, well, these are really interesting times. And she said, yes, there's an ancient Chinese piece about that. It's a curse. May you live in interesting times, because these are not easy times.
No, these aren't easy times. They're very interesting times, and they provide us a lot of opportunity to hold someone and have compassion for where they are in their journey, right? But also have that empowered piece within ourselves come forward to kind of teach a new way, maybe a more evolved way of being like, no, that's not us anymore, and we don't want to do that. How about this, right? And really like having a voice and kind of not sitting on the sidelines anymore. And, those of us, who want something more, evolved, maybe start stepping forward to play a part in, helping our society, our collective to grow as a whole, and to understand that, it's more about everybody and not, one thing or another, or, they and them, or, it's us, it's us. And, what's better for the majority, right?
Yeah. And again, I think it comes back to how to hold a loving frequency. And we have absolutely, really learned so much in the last few years of the more polarity that shows up. It's like things I just never imagined would be polarized.
Mm-hmm.
It does ask us to keep expanding our container and growing, and also to step up, and of course we all have different ways that we've agreed on a soul level to step up. We have different gifts, and some are public and some are not public, but to really do our part, to do what we can do, basically, because the world really needs that right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And sitting with things, sitting with topics, what would be loving, for this person or that person. I like that idea. If everybody, sat down from that perspective.
Yes. What's the most loving way we can approach this?
Right.
Of course, that does bring back, well, what we were taught culturally about love wasn't really love, it was codependency. So how do you really, it keeps bringing me back to the body sensation,
right,
of that expansive, holding somebody and feeling expansive, that, because that's what compassion is too, is how holding a compassionate vibration without agreeing. We don't have to agree to hold compassion, and see where it goes.
And sometimes deep love is listening to someone's needs and desires.
Yeah.
Right. And other people's needs and desires aren't reflective of our own sometimes. We have to realize that.
Yeah. And that is, when we really understand we're all interconnected like that, then we understand that there has to be middle ground and compromise, especially in personal relationships, certainly, but also in the collective, without what comes from without stepping into harm, without stepping into harming others. If we could hold that, do no harm, I would be really collectively happy.
Really collectively happy about that too, Judith. Do no harm. Right. And I wish, that the people who hold office would also, sit in that space, right? In loving kindness, in do no harm, right?
Yeah.
Because I think decisions would be made a little bit differently if they really held that space with consciousness.
I think absolutely. And, the other piece on decisions, which I also talk about in the book, is the Native American concept of 7 generations. How is my decision going to affect 7 generations forward? And we have been so out of touch with that. It's with some consciousness here, oh, we'll trash this planet and go to Mars. Wait a second. What really serves our progeny? What really serves the next generation and the next generation and the next generation? And when you begin to think and feel like that, you have to honor the interconnectedness. And the generation doesn't just mean my kids, it means your kids and your kids and your kids and all those people I don't agree with's kids, right?
Yeah, I love that, Judith. Thank you. Yeah, it really is that forward thinking. What are the consequences of what I'm doing today going to be for the generations that follow me?
Right.
Right.
Right. And of course, then we have to get rid of the for-profit concept versus, I like the idea of entrepreneurialism in the sense it's creative.
Mm-hmm.
But if your motive is for profit, you've lost the ability to stay interconnected. If your motive is to be prosperous, that's a little bit different, even though it may have the same outcome.
Mm-hmm. Dive into that a little bit more. Explain a little bit more about that. I think that needs a little bit more attention.
Right. All right, let me take a breath and see where to focus on this. As we expand our awareness, we know that the universe is abundant and that everyone can have abundance. The belief that it's okay for me to have abundance at your expense, right? That's when it gets screwed up. It's like, that's not okay. Hello, folks. But if I have a business or a product that really is useful for people, is kind to the earth, it does no harm, and might, be really enjoyable or healthy or whatever, and it brings me abundance, great. Now, how much abundance we need is a whole other thing. And I have I don't think that we need a huge amount of abundance to live a very abundant, easy life. We need a sense of flow. We need everybody in my world should live in someplace beautiful and clean and have access to healthy, delicious, nutritious food and wonderful, evolved healing methods so that their bodies can be healthy. You don't need to be a millionaire to do this. Right. You don't need even a big 6-figure income. This can be done for everybody. There's enough. And again, it's back to the do no harm, but also to understand if I'm just out for wealth, if you will, and I don't care that there's a whole group of people that, in fact, may be my employees, but that don't get basic access to what all beings should have. I don't know how else to say this. It's not okay with me.
I agree. Abundance in all forms, in all aspects of life.
Yeah. And again, there's
For
enough
all.
for everybody to live a good, healthy, fun. You like to travel, you can travel. You don't need $1 million to do that. So that's how I would kind of sum it up.
That's great. Is there anything that you would like to leave us with today as a final?
Let me see. Let me go in and see what comes through on that.
Sure.
Oh, well, okay. It just really did come through. To hold a positive vision, to really see this happening, to not go into a lot of that dystopian stuff that's on our media, just to, not to go into Pollyanna stuff, but to understand that the more of us that hold this positive, loving vision and know it can happen, which means breaking out of the old programming that says it's impossible, the closer we get. So hold on to the optimism. You don't need it, it doesn't have to be 24/7. We're human. But to keep imagining, what kind of world do we want to live in? What kind of planet do we all deserve to live on?
Oh, I love that. And you really talk about that at the end of your book, ways that we can create this and envision this together.
Right.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Judith. This has been a great conversation. It's been a pleasure to have you on the show.
And it's been a pleasure to be on, Liz. It's been great. Thank you.
You're welcome. How can people reach you?
Well, my website is called empoweringthespirit.com. And get on there and you will find all sorts of things that I offer, as well as there's a contact form. I love hearing from people. And one of the great gifts on this last book is I hear from people all over the world. And I've had students from all over the world. And that's always exciting to see how this is spreading everywhere. Yeah. And so that's the best way to get a hold of me. And I do answer personal emails, so they will hear from me and have my email address at that point.
And if people want to work with you, you have an upcoming program in September, yes?
Yes. Well, I have a few ongoing. I do still do individual sessions with a limited number of people. I don't work with a lot of people, but the people that are supposed to work with me find me. And if they get on the website, they can see what that looks like for them. And then I teach, I actually have 2 classes that I run periodically. One is connecting star consciousness with earth consciousness, which is really based on the book. And then my newest class, I just finished up, I don't know, 2 weeks ago, I think, but I'm going to run it again in September, which is embracing our starseed nature. Remembering, well, maybe we didn't originate on this planet, and maybe we have a lot of wisdom to help bring to this planet. And I'm excited about that. I'm going to start it again. I think it's September 18th. Again, it's 4 weeks, it's an hour and a half, it's simple, but people get a huge amount out of it. I do a lot of guided meditations so that to really bring people into their own wisdom. And then there's a way to share with that. And then I have a mystery school that I created with a dear friend, soul sister of mine, called the Shamanic Multidimensional Mystery School. And it's a 4-segment over around 18 months. We're in the middle of a class, so to speak, of a circle. And we haven't decided our next date, but it'll be sometime in 2023. Wonderful. So those are the main things that I'm putting forward. It's what I'm excited about now. It's what I've drawn people in for. And you're also on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. Yes. Yes. That is true. Awesome. Great. Thank you, Judith. It's been a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for joining me. Ditto. Okay. And thank you everyone for joining us today. Again, this is Raise the Vibe with Liz, and I'm your host, Liz Peterson. And you can find me on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube as well on Raise the Vibe with Liz. And if you would like to work with me, my website is liz'shealingtouch.com. Thank you and have a great day, everyone. And remember to get out there and raise the vibe. Bye.